Hi guys, welcome back. Today I want to share with you the books that I read during the month of July. The first book I read was within a read-along that was organized by Mara from Books Like Whoa, and it was The Hunchback of Notre by Victor Hugo. This is a historical novel that was published in 1831, and it follows different people living in Paris and that are somehow related to the Notre Dame Cathedral. So you have Quasimodo, which is the bell ringer of the cathedral, but you also follow a poet who is putting up plays for the church. You have the community of the Roma in Paris, including Esmeralda, and you also have members of the clergy and members of the royalty in France at that time. This book is quite big and it was definitely a slow burn, but it was way more engaging than I thought it would be. The characters felt really fleshed out and they didn't feel like caricatures, which was something I was a bit scared about. Because my only previous knowledge about anything that has to do with the plot of this book is sadly the Disney movie, which frankly has nothing to do with what is happening in this book. So I was really pleased with that. It was obviously quite heartbreaking. There's some horrible things that happen to the characters, but also really funny in places. Like I was almost laughing out loud. There was some really ridiculous moments, and it was still keeping me engaged, because I guess if you only have misery happening, it's not really engaging. I also really liked some of the character dynamics. You have some really interesting dynamics going on between, for example, the Archdeacon of Notre Dame, Claude Frollo, and his younger brother, Jean. Many bits and pieces that I found really, really interesting. One little minus point is that some parts of the novel include some descriptions of the landscape, of the Paris scenery, of how the cathedral looks like, which is fine for a few pages, but Victor Hugo can go on, and there is specifically one part where he starts talking about what Paris looks like from the top of the cathedral in his time, and then he moves on to talk about what the view down from the cathedral looked like possibly in the time that he's talking about, so in the medieval times. And yeah, one of his tensions that I really did like though was the one where he talks about the significance of the cathedral from an architectural point of view and what it means like as a cultural monument and like a monument to its time. And I thought he had some really interesting arguments in there. It almost felt like an essay within the novel, which I guess I went with because I thought it was really interesting. In general, it's kind of a romantic medieval fiction novel that Hugo wrote in his time. So obviously there were a few things that seemed kind of far-fetched and also kind of overly dramatic, but overall I really, really enjoyed this book way more than I thought I would, and I'm really glad I read it. And I also feel less scared to, at some point, I don't know when, jump into Les Misérables. The next book I finished in July is a graphic novel, and it's the third volume of Monstress. It's called Haven, and in general this series follows Maika, a young woman who is an Arsenic. So she's kind of a magical creature, and in this world that is kind of Asian-inspired fantasy, there is a war going on between humans and Arsenics. And basically Maika is just in the midst of all this, and she is on the run, and in this installment she finds refuge in a neutral city. So being in the third volume I still really enjoy the characters and the character dynamics. One thing that I did not enjoy so much about this volume is that it felt like the overall arching plot was really dragging. After what happened in the second volume, I really wanted things to start wrapping up a bit, like because the authors just started a lot of different plots or like subplots, and it felt like now something should start getting wrapped up because there's just new plots coming all the time. So that was kind of the minus point for me, but in general it's still very entertaining. The characters are great and fast-paced. and just what you need from like a fantasy comic, and the artwork is still really beautiful. Next up, I have a bit of an odd one. This is The Rose and the Yew Tree by Mary Westmacott, and this is a pen name for Agatha Christie, and it turns out she wrote some drama slash romance, not so really romance novels under this pen name, and I just picked this up randomly at my library and had never heard anything about it and just went into it completely blind. This follows a man called Hugh Norris, and he recently moved into a small coastal town in England, and we hear that he is invalid from a car crash, and it's basically about him settling in with his sister. And then you start getting some impressions from the town itself and all like the local politics going on. And it turns out that there's this man that's running for parliament for the town, and he is a very mysterious figure, and somehow he mesmerizes all the women, whatever that means. And the plot picks up from there. So if you're used to Agatha Christie's really sharp character studies, you will like this because it's still there. Although it's kind of more like a drama novel, there's no mystery in there. Not per se, but the mystery in itself is who the people are and what their motives are. And I think she does this again really well. She is portraying people in small towns in England after the Second World War. And it's a lot about like caring for others and how that relates to when someone is invalid. But it's also like about missed opportunities and redemption, and also there's a lot of interesting points about class in Britain. So it wasn't at all what I expected, but I also didn't expect much. And for this, it really surprised me. The plot was engaging. I kept wanting to know what was happening. Though I would say that in this book, I had quite a few of like, oh, Agatha moments reading this. More like in things happening with the plot and also how some men and women were portrayed, but it was mostly secondary characters, but still this kind of annoys me sometimes. There are some mystery novels from her where it's also like things like that this mysterious character is described as like ugly, but like, I'm quoting, ugly but mesmerizing and things like this, and that he attracts women despite of his ugliness. And yeah, I'm not gonna go into it, but there's some moments of this which made me cringe, but you still have to remember also in which context these things were written. But in general, it was still very engaging. It's a tragedy, it's kind of a drama tragedy, so it is really sad. Even more sad than I imagined, because I think I've never read anything so sad by Agatha Christie, which really surprised me. But it was just really interesting to get to know like another facet of Agatha Christie's writing portfolio. The next book I read was a book called Zéro Déchet by Bea Johnson. This book was originally written in English, so you can get it in English, and it's a book by a blogger, and she is kind of an advocate on how everyone can do their part to decrease their waste. And what I enjoyed a lot about this book is that there were a lot of practical aspects to it, a lot of recipes, of tips and tricks, and I love this kind of things. The parts I enjoyed a little bit less were the parts where the author was talking about her own experience, especially in the beginning when she had not adopted like a zero waste kind of lifestyle. And some of these things were like a bit cringeworthy. Like, I have seen some really bad reviews of this book, and in these reviews, people who review it mainly focus on this part, that she sounded like obnoxious and whatever. I didn't feel like that, but I thought these parts were quite hit and miss in terms of what they brought to my reading experience. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I personally didn't find it patronizing. I just thought it presented many options on how you can do your part to reduce waste on our planet, and for that reason I would really recommend it to anyone who's interested in this topic. Okay, the next book I finished was the one 5-star read from me this month. Absolutely loved it, and it's a non-fiction works called A is for Arsenic by Kathryn Harkup. So this is, as I said, a non-fiction book which explores the poisons that Agatha Christie used in her books to kill off her characters. The author is a chemist, and she goes into great details about what chemicals are involved in like a poison, if it's a poison from a plant, what it actually does to your body on a molecular level. So maybe this all sounds really kind of technical for you guys, but somehow she makes it clear in a really entertaining way. You don't need to have any knowledge beforehand about anything like that. I felt like I could really fangirl over it. And what is also really interesting is that she matches this together with some actual stories by Agatha Christie, and she goes through them in places where a particular poison has been used and what it means for the plot, and if it makes sense, if like chemically it would make sense, say like to use I don't know how much of some poison, would it really kill a person? And she also goes a bit into Agatha Christie's life and how her training as a nurse really gave her a lot of insights about how poisons actually work, and that she was also really acclaimed for her really accuracy in these books. So I found all these points really fascinating. I don't know, I'm biased, it's just the perfect book for me. I'm a biochemist and I love Agatha Christie, so it's like the book for me. But if you feel like you're interested in any of these points, I think if you're an Agatha Christie fan, you should definitely check this out. And I thought it was really, really engaging and interesting. So yeah, absolutely love this. Okay, and to stay on my Agatha Christie trip, the last book I finished this month was Evil Under the Sun by Agatha Christie. I read this as an audiobook. It was the BBC full cast adaptation where John Moffat reads Hercule Poirot, which I thought was really good. I read this together with a bunch of other people in a read-along organized by Julie from The Hungry Bookworm, and it was really good. It was a reread for me. This tells the story of how Poirot goes on a holiday on an island off the coast of Cornwall, and he is there to rest, but it turns out someone gets killed. So it's kind of a semi-closed circle mystery, which I really like. I love closed circle mystery. Like the best one I ever read was obviously And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. But I really like this setup that people are kind of trapped somewhere and one of them has to be the murderer, and people start really speculating. Basically, there's this actress coming onto this island, and this calm atmosphere on this island in this hotel is disrupted, and a day later or so she is found killed on a beach. And the thing is that everyone has a reason to love and or hate her at the same time. I really enjoyed this. The audiobook was really good. The plot is really cool. It plays around with a lot of tropes from Agatha Christie novels that I really enjoyed. I think it's just a very enjoyable, perfect holiday read. Alright guys, that was it. These were the books that I got to in the month of July. I would love to know if you have read any of these, if you're interested in any of these. Tell me in the comments down below what you have read in July. What were some of your highlights? I would love to know. I hope you're having a really, really good reading month so far in August, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!